in just a moment. But kind of big picture, what stands out about this matchup?
I mean, it's everything, right? This is for the chance to win the Big Ten, a chance to make the college football playoff. And there's so much at stake for both of these programs and these coaches. I've been going back and forth all week of who is under more pressure here. And, Penn State has not won games like this under James Franklin. They're 0-9 on the road against top 10 opponents. So it's massive because they've been building to this, building a roster, developing the talent to be able to win this game. And then you have Ryan Day, and we saw the release after the Notre Dame game that shows us he knows how much pressure he's under and his expectations in games like that. So I can't decide who's under more pressure because Ohio State certainly needs to win this game so they can get back to the playoff and people are going to give them, a really good chance against Michigan. But Penn State needs to do this to take that next step for them.
I think Ryan Day's under more pressure, and I think it's by design of James Franklin. Every coach puts together an emotional game plan before the week starts, just like you put together a 1st and 10 game plan. How am I going to connect with my team? How am I going to motivate my team? James has gone down this road, Akron, right? Every game's the same. We're going to just focus on the team we're going to play. We're 1-0 this season. That's another way of saying that all the games are the same. I don't think all the games are the same. I think it's more fun for the players when you emphasize one game over another. I think it's more of a challenge to a coach that admits one game is more important than another, because then he or she becomes responsible to get their team up for the big games and then get their teams up for the games they're supposed to win. So I lean towards our co-worker, Urban Meyer, who's wacko, that you can make some one game more important than any other game. And so I think Ryan Day understands this game's more important. To the Penn State people, this is just maybe another Akron. Okay, it's a one-game season.
But you're talking about internal communication.
Correct.
Right? But externally, everyone knows how important this game is. And it will reflect in how the coach is perceived by the fan base. So the fans know that this game is bigger than a hypothetical game against Akron, and it will color the way that they look at their coach, and their coach knows that too. I mean, no matter what he says.
What proof do you have that he knows that this is more important than a previous game?
Because I give him credit for living on planet Earth.
Really? Maybe he gives himself credit for being the same every week.
No,
because that's the way he thinks.
He knows that they haven't won these games. He knows his record against Ohio State and Michigan. He's talked about building a roster to compete and chasing Ohio State, and that's how they got to this point.
We're not elite. Remember, we're not elite. That came after Ohio State.
I've never heard him say that this game is more important than any other game.
Saying we're not elite and then Ohio State is elite is saying that. I think you're right about how you approach the week.
That's all I'm talking about is how you approach the week.
Right, but we're saying the outside pressures are still there about what's at stake.
Yeah, so I would even say they're more on Ryan Day. I think the job at Ohio State is you have to be undefeated. I don't think you have to go undefeated at Penn State.
I think that's a bigger.
Yeah, and I would agree too. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but go ahead.
No.
No, I would agree. I think there's more pressure on Ryan Day just because you've already lost twice in a row to Michigan. You're expected to win the national championship every year, fairly or unfairly. And now if you lose to Penn State, too, although you could reconcile that then by counteract it by beating Michigan in the game later this year. But I do think, for Penn State, I know you would love to, in this last year, the 14 playoff, make the 14 playoff for the first time ever, but they're going to make the 12-team playoff.
Oh, yeah. Well, they're the team that if you do the math over the last 9 years, they would have made it the most of someone that hasn't been there. You also have, this is a home game for Ohio State, right? So obviously, you're going to be expected to win. You're expected to take care of business, even against a challenging opponent. You've also been there. You already played Notre Dame. Penn State hasn't been tested that way. So, yes, I think I agree with you guys.
But also, the Ohio State goals are defined when you take your job. What do they say? Win a national championship and beat your rival.
Yep.
Penn State says we're unrivaled, so that takes the pressure off any rival game, right?
Yeah, sure.
I don't ever hear the Penn State coach say my job is to win the national championship. That's why it's more. And Ryan Day has more pressure on him than Jim Harbaugh, even if he was winning that Ohio State-Michigan game, because Michigan has to tread lightly. Michigan State, right? They can't say we have one rival. So it's always been harder on the Ohio State coach than any other coach, maybe in America.
I don't think that Ryan had more pressure on him than Jim Harbaugh did 2 years ago.
No, when that was the game that they couldn't win.
That's fair. An isolated year, yes, that's fair.
But I understand your point, big picture. All right, let's dive into some of the X's and O's here. Let's start when Penn State has the ball. We've talked a lot about what they are and what they aren't offensively, but I'll tell you what they are. They're the highest scoring team in the Big Ten. So regardless of how they're getting it done, they're putting points on the board, which is what you're looking for from any offense. How do you see them matching up against what has been an outstanding Ohio State defense?
I don't think there's any question they match up athletically. I mean, Penn State has as much talent on both sides of the ball, I think, as Ohio State does. I think the biggest difference in this game for the Penn State offense is Drew Aller. You know, he started the season at home. When he started that Northwestern game, and that obviously wasn't the same type of game, right? He was in a stadium that was going to be a little different than the Ohio State stadium. I don't think Drew got off to a great start. And the only thing I could figure is it was his first road game. And then you take Jim Knowles, who has tweaked his defense, right? He has made it better. And Ryan Day told us when we were on campus, he is going to make the adjustments from giving up the big plays against the best teams. And he's made that adjustment. But he also has a pressure vein, if you will, in his body, and I think he's going to pressure Drew Aller. So I think when they have the ball, it's going to be Drew Aller against James Knowles.
Yeah, and I think that what's going to be really interesting, because I do think a lot of people are talking about the quarterbacks in this game because they're first-year starters. They're being put in situations they haven't necessarily been in yet. And for Drew Aller, you know, you are going up against the best defense that you have faced so far. And this isn't an explosive offense yet. We talk about this every single week. And what has typically beaten Ohio State in these last few years, these very few losses under Ryan Day? Explosive plays. So do they need that? Are they going to push that? Or are you going to rely on who you've been, which is this short intermediate passing game, a consistent run game, and controlling the game, not making mistakes? And that's who Drew Aller has been so far. You know, we talked to, I met a couple of my colleagues and I talked to a bunch of staffers who played Ohio State and Penn State this season, and they thought there was some opportunity on the back end of Ohio State's defense. But again, big plays. If you're not going to take them, that plays into Ohio State's advantages and the pressure up front.
I thought that was interesting. I read that, and I think I have thought pretty highly of Ohio State's secondary this year. It was interesting to see some of the opposing coaches say, if you can get the ball off, that they can be taken advantage of.
You have to have the right guys to do it, though.
Yeah, right. And again, that just hasn't been the MO so far for Penn State. I mean, it's remarkable. Like, you look at Drew Aller, 241 straight passes to start his career without an interception. That sounds good. It's never been done at the FBS level. It's the longest streak ever for a quarterback to start his career without an interception. So he's not just been good taking care of the ball. He's been historically good taking care of the ball. What about on the other side? What about when Ohio State has the ball offensively?
Well, you know, it's similar, right? Because we talk about the strengths of these defenses and how aggressive they can be. And Penn State's really good at those negative plays, sacks, tackle for losses that we see from them. But I want to see, again, a Kyle McCord that we saw grow in that final drive against Notre Dame, get confidence. But what happens, we don't know exactly what the run game's going to look like. Who's going to be healthy? How healthy are they going to be? You know, you still have the best player on the field in Marvin Harrison, but what about if Emeka Egbuka is not there? How does that impact what they want to do against a very aggressive defensive front? That's what's going to be really interesting. I think Ohio State's going to need to be able to run the ball, and they have not been able to run the ball in every game they've played this year, but I think that's really important for opening up what they're going to need to be able to do against the back end of the defense.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's 1A and 1B. I would have started with the offensive line. You started with the quarterback. So I would start with the line play and then move to the quarterback, which is the same thing that you've said, Nicole. But when you look at the Ohio State offensive line, which, by the way, they made the Joe Moore honor roll this week as one of the best offensive lines in the country. And so they have gotten better. But where they really struggle, and you can see it in the Purdue game, they struggle blocking movement. And this front of Penn State, as you mentioned, is as good a front maybe as there is in the conference and maybe in the country. So I start with that matchup being most important on the line. Can Ohio State block the movement of Manny Diaz's defensive front? Then I would go to Kyle McCord. But the last time we talked about Kyle McCord, he went to South Bend and he looked pretty good. And so he has that in his background. Drew Aller does not have it. Plus, Kyle now is playing in Ohio Stadium, not Notre Dame Stadium.
Yeah.
So those are the two biggest factors.
And the O-line and the run game go together, obviously.
Absolutely.
But that's just been something we've wondered about for a while. The injuries have not helped, but that is going to have to be something that's established in this game and obviously against Michigan.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch. I mean, we talk about the pressure on Kyle McCord, right, and Penn State leading the nation in sacks per game. But Ohio State to your point, part of it is injuries, just hasn't run the ball as well as they have in past years either. That a function of the offensive line too. You're down more than a yard per carry over a season ago. So pretty interesting. Jerry, I do want to just bring up kind of this notion with Kyle McCord and kind of tie it back in with Drew Aller, because we talked before the Notre Dame game that, hey, Sam Hartman's been in big situations before and Kyle McCord hasn't. And, well, you don't know until you know when someone's in a situation like that. And Kyle McCord rose to the occasion. This becomes the question with Drew Aller, too, right? He may have it in him, too.
Absolutely.
We just don't know.
Right. Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, and this, regardless of what happens to Drew Aller, this is his biggest moment this year, whether he turns out looking like the end of the Notre Dame game or if he looks like he's a young quarterback. So it's going to be a great growth for him. I mean, fabulous. It'll be interesting for sure. You make a great point.
It's pretty fascinating, too, right? You have the Penn State quarterback who grew up in Ohio. You have the Ohio State quarterback who went to high school in Pennsylvania. It is, I mean, all the interconnectedness in this one again. It's just a great game. Cannot wait until that one kicks off tomorrow. We got so into its game with Michigan State. The Big Ten announcing yesterday that they have been informed by the NCAA that Jim Harbaugh's team is being investigated for sign stealing. Though sign stealing itself is not against the rules, multiple media reports are saying that the issue is that Michigan State allegedly pilfered the signals by scouting opponents in person in advance, which is illegal by NCAA rules. Obviously, just an allegation at this point, and one Michigan coach Jim Harbaugh has flatly denied. Harbaugh releasing a statement that said, quote, "I do not have any knowledge or information regarding the University of Michigan football program illegally stealing signals, nor have I directed any staff member or others to participate in an off-campus scouting assignment. I have no awareness of anyone on our staff having done that or having directed that action. No matter what program or organization that I've led throughout my career, my instructions and awareness of how we scout opponents have always been firmly within the rules." So, Nicole, I know you have been following this story. What do we know at this point, and what don't we know?
Well, we do know that it is about the idea of off-campus, in-person scouting. As you mentioned, and it's worth repeating, that is the part that's against NCAA rules, as well as technology. So if you were using technology to record the opponent putting their signs together and making their signs, and then using that in-game or recording it, again, off-site, that would be another issue to be looking at here. But what we don't know is exactly how this worked. We know that there are allegations. The NCAA is looking into it. Early in the process, the reason that the Big Ten was looped in is because you're going to go to future opponents. There's also gambling implications of something like this as well. But you still don't know who knew what when and what exactly did this look like of going to games of potential future opponents or games of opponents on your schedule. What was that information? How was it relayed? There's still a lot that we don't know. And then obviously Michigan will want to figure out who did know. Did anyone else on the staff know about this? So there's just a lot of unknowns and it's vague. And a lot of people are excited about the sign stealing because it's kind of an art within college football. But that's actually not the part that is against NCAA rules. Coaches do that all the time. Clemson with Brent Venables was very well known for this. And coaches have talked about Michigan doing that. The issue is how they obtained the information that they are then using in games.
Any sense of how long this will take to unfold? I mean, I know the NCAA is involved here, so if we're using that as precedent, it could be a while?
Yes. If this goes the route of the off-campus, in-person scouting, that's a committee on infractions issue, and that goes through that process, which tends to take a while. You do already have another NCAA investigation. So, how are they going to work in concert with each other or get added on to each other in terms of what was alleged? That will impact it, as well as potential punishment, the severity of the punishment. There's still, again, a lot of unknowns here at the early stages.
All right, so interesting story that obviously we're going to be following quite a bit. Major implicating to that total tomorrow.
Well, for an upset to happen, you have to have both teams that contribute to the upset, right? The favorite has to come in flat, maybe distracted, as Nicole just described. There could be a distraction on campus, although it seems like they play better after distraction in Ann Arbor. JJ's rallying the troops around his coach, and so that may be unlikely. But so you need help from the favorite, and then as the underdog, you can't turn it over. You have to hope that the other team turns it over, right? You can't give up big plays. You have to also be out of character. Michigan State has turned the ball over quite a bit. They're on their second quarterback, so nothing looks like it's in favor of Michigan State upsetting Michigan, except that it's in East Lansing. Evidently, they brought Mark D'Antonio out. He's been in the locker room a little bit more than he has been. So you need participation by the favorite and the underdog for Michigan State to have a chance.
Yeah, Mark D'Antonio really got into this rivalry, right? And they won.
Did this rivalry matter to him? I can't recall.
Just a little bit. But, like, that is the part that you can't necessarily just write off. Weird things have happened in this rivalry.
Absolutely.
And the team that wasn't supposed to win, that was written off, has won this game before. But you're totally right. A lot would need to go right because Michigan's just playing so well. They've been so consistent on both sides of the ball. It's so reliable. It transfers from game to game. Even though it's had a couple slow starts and first quarters that have been they pull away and they figure it out. They've just been so suffocating defensively. They establish that run game. The offensive line is terrific. JJ doesn't make mistakes. So how are you going to make enough mistakes, right, to keep Michigan State in the game? That's the question.
They are a really complete team. And you just look at Michigan State, the troubles they've had holding onto the football, the troubles they've had moving the football. It does seem like Michigan would have to play a subpar game. But again, to your guys' points,
they both have to play opposite of how they've been playing.
This is why we play. You never know. Iowa is the front runner in the West. They took down Wisconsin last week. Now they are hosting Minnesota. Gophers coming off a bye. I think we would all agree they needed the bye, a chance to maybe regroup as they head into the second half of the season. Iowa riding high despite the issues that have been well chronicled on this show and just about everywhere else that people talk about Iowa football. Any reason to believe they stumble here at home against the Gophers?
Again, if they make mistakes that are uncharacteristic to them, but their formula is so clear, and it's actually a formula that Minnesota has been relying on when they've won games, right? Try to control the game as much as possible, take care of the ball, don't make mistakes. But basically, Iowa is operating where they only need one big play, and they're taking care of the game outside of that, right? The defense has been terrific. Torrey Taylor's a weapon on special teams. So there's not that much that you need, and they're going to do it at the most peak Iowa way possible. So it's just hard to imagine that someone could out Iowa.
It's a perfect fit for Iowa, right? Because Minnesota's trying to reinvent themselves, right? Mo's gone, Tanner Morgan's gone. So they're running the ball with a young quarterback. When you run the ball with a young quarterback, if you're not successful running the ball, it puts the pressure on the quarterback. So is there a better run defense in the conference or in the country? Maybe not. So it's fair to say that going into the game, you could say Iowa can shut down the Minnesota run game. And then when you put the pressure on Kaliak-Manis, against Louisiana was his best game when he had pressure in his face. Other than that, he has not handled pressure all that much. So you talk about what looks to be a perfect matchup for Iowa and not such a perfect matchup for Minnesota. This is it.
One of the keys, I think, for Minnesota to have a chance is the time of possession, right? You've got to take up the time. Try to keep, again, Iowa's defense is one of their better units, but you're trying to shorten the game, shorten the possessions, and do something like that. But Iowa can go 3 and out, and it doesn't affect the outcome of the game, right? So, crazy, that's where it's such a challenging matchup. And again, a lot of these teams in the West would be comfortable winning a game in Iowa-ish fashion, but Iowa just does it better than everybody.
Right, you're going to be in the game. We were talking about this yesterday because everyone's in the game against Iowa. They're not going to blow anyone out. We certainly haven't seen them do that outside of one non-conference game, but they just seem to have a way when it gets down to it of making the big play. It'll be interesting to see if Darius Taylor's back coming off the bye. That would make a huge difference for Minnesota. We haven't seen Cody Lindenberg all year, who is supposed to be one of their better defenders. There's some thought that maybe he's able to play in this game. So
plus there's the sidebar whether the timeouts are more important or the trophy, because some people left the timeouts and took the trophy. So
Kirk's also very good in this rivalry.
Yeah, he is. It's as good as PJ Fleck has been in Minnesota. This has been the issue for him. He has yet to beat Iowa. He's at least 500 against everyone else in the West, yet to beat Iowa. How about Wisconsin going to Illinois? The Badgers now without Tanner Mordecai. Illinois is feeling much better, Jerry. I mean, went down to Maryland. I think many people had written them off. They go in and beat what I think we all believe is a pretty good Maryland team. So now all of a sudden bringing some momentum, bringing it home against a backup quarterback.
Okay, so I think you would agree with me. Shocked the way Illinois started this season, but not shocked that Brett Bielema got this team back. Really, I almost think Maryland was set up for this, right? Because of the way everybody was talking about Illinois. So all of a sudden, Illinois has a run game. They're defending the run. But what they're doing with Altmaier against Maryland really, I think, was the key, because their offensive line was having trouble protecting Altmaier earlier in the year. They moved them on movement passes. They threw some screens. When they went deep, it was 1, 2, 3, hit and throw it. They very rarely went in the middle of the field because that play takes more time actually than it does to throw it deep. So Brett Beal, and they got better on defense. So Mr. Fix-It he went back to work. My guess is, as we've been around him, I bet he was as positive as any coach that had that record had ever been. And when you do that, when you're losing and you're positive with your team, it energizes your team. Because if you're not positive, they feel like you're blaming us for this whole mess.
Yeah, it's remarkable how instead of just chalking it up to a lost season, they responded and rebounded and won a big game. It's almost like these two teams are coming into this game on polar opposites because Wisconsin had so much in front of them. We had talked last week on the Friday walkthrough. They win this game, they're in control in the West. Everyone else would have 2 losses. They lose that game to Iowa in a really challenging way. And we talk a lot about, again, this first year with Luke Fickell, things that are working, things aren't. Injuries, Tanner Mordecai goes down. So you're dealing with all of this and you're coming in on a downswing. And then Illinois, the most positive momentum they've had all season. And
anyone who denies that playing against your ex-team isn't a factor, they're lying. Okay, so, Brett Bielema's got great history. I mean, do you remember his post-game interview on the field last year with his 2 daughters and all that? I mean, it's important to Brett. Now, he may not tell that to the team because it's a little maybe of a distraction, but this is important. And it's important to Luke Fickell, too, right?
Well, that game is essentially why Luke Fickell is here, right?
Yes.
So it was a pivotal game last year
before
we really knew how good Illinois could be. And this year, it's pivotal for both of these teams as whatever their goals are for the rest of the season.
It is. Just echoing the sentiment that you had a moment or so ago. I mean, if you would take us back a week in time and say that we'd be talking about this game in the way that we are, right? Illinois riding momentum, Wisconsin licking its wounds, and without its quarterback right, I mean, it's just amazing how much changes in 7 days, and this game front and center in that regard. We got Urban Analysis coming up this weekend nationally is tomorrow night. It's right here on the network. Number 1 versus number 2, battle of unbeatens, Wisconsin and Nebraska. I mean, look at the dominance of both these teams this year. It is staggering. The price just to get in the building on the secondary market around $300. Courtside seats going for well over $1,000. It is an event. Big Ten Network volleyball analyst Elena Sklar here to help get us ready. I mean, again, the ticket prices tell part of the story, but just give us a sense. How massive is this in the volleyball world that you live in?
Yeah, I mean, this is the matchup of the season. I've had this circled on my calendar since the schedules came out back in August. Number 1 versus number 2. It's only the 11th time that the top 2 teams in the country have ever faced each other. And then it's only since 1998, the first time that they've been undefeated when number 1 and number 2 face each other. These 2 teams are so fun to watch because of how good they are on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively. And they just have such a fun rivalry. It's honestly everything you could wish for in a rivalry. They're undefeated, so it's some high-level volleyball. There's so much respect for each other and each other's programs, huge fan bases, attendance records being broken. It's really checks every single box you could ask for in a rivalry matchup.
I mean, it's massive. The interest is second to none in terms of this matchup. And it's crazy to see the degree to which Wisconsin's dominated. 10 straight wins over Nebraska going back to 2017. So Nebraska's 0-10 against Wisconsin. They're 102-13 against the rest of the Big Ten. Wisconsin, as we know, has been a dominant program. Give us a sense of why they've been so dominant this year. How have they gotten to number 1? What should people be watching when they focus on the Badgers tomorrow?
Wisconsin is such a physical team. I mean, their average height at the net is 6'5". They're so physical all across the net. So their offense is just insane. They have weapons everywhere. They run a 6-2 offense traditionally, meaning they usually have 3 hitters up in the front row. We might see something different as they've had a couple injuries, but they have so many hitters that can put the ball away. 2 terminal outside hitters in Sarah Franklin and Temi Thomas-Ayalara. And then they have Carter Booth in the middle, who's the most efficient hitter in all of the conference. And then on the right side, the second most efficient hitter in the conference in Anna Schmreck. So not to mention 6'9" and 6'7" is the height of those two. So their offense is just so much depth. They have weapons everywhere. And then they also put up an insane block. I mentioned the size of these players. So what comes with that is a great block. So honestly, they just have so many weapons on their offense that it's really difficult to know who you want to try to focus on defending and stopping.
And as good as they have been through the years, if they get to 19-0, it would be their best start ever, which is pretty remarkable. Again, they've had some fabulous teams here recently. The other thing that really struck me, they have beaten 5 straight top 2 opponents. Like that's just like, you talk about rising to the occasion. That's what Nebraska's going to try to do. They're going to try to rise to the occasion. They are very young, right? The best recruiting class in the country, as we were just talking about. How have they taken so much youth and gotten to this elite point so quickly?
When you have John Cook as your coach, you're going to be able to do that. I mean, there's a rich history of success with Nebraska, and John Cook is at the top of that. So he had the #1 recruiting class coming in, but then you have players like Lexi Rodriguez, your libero who's a junior holding down that backcourt, and then Merritt Beeson on the right side who's bringing a little bit more of a veteran presence. The one thing about this Nebraska team, though, that's so much fun to watch is they fight. They are one of the most intense teams that I've seen all season, and you can tell, and a big part of that is their defense, led at the net by Becca Alec, who's one of the blocks per set leaders in the conference, and then I already mentioned Lexi Rodriguez, who's one of the best liberos in the entire nation. Their defense is just so scrappy and just so intense, and that team is never going to give up on any point.
Allowing the lowest opponent hitting percentage in the country, and then you talk about that intensity. It's obviously, as good as it is, it's going to be ratcheted up just being at home, being in this incredible environment. I know injuries have been an issue with both of these teams here recently. Bring us up to date on who's healthy and who may not be.
Yes, so for Nebraska, Coach John Cook did confirm that Lindsey Krause, his 6th rotation outside, is going to be out for this match, so Allie Batenhorst will be stepping in. Batenhorst has a ton of success with this program as well, but Krause is going to be a big loss because she's been unstoppable in conference play. And then on Wisconsin's side, we've seen a little bit different of an offense for them as they've been switching to a 5-1 offense with Izzy Ashburn, meaning she plays all the way around. MJ Hamill and Devin Robinson are both out. They did practice on Wednesday, but did not participate in Wednesday's match against Northwestern. So we're not too sure if we're going to see those two on the court. So some big names, some big starters that we may or may not see in this matchup. That's definitely going to be a little bit different for both teams.
It should be amazing tomorrow night. Elena, really appreciate you coming by and informing us on this. Again, when you have a matchup this big, you certainly want to talk about it from every angle. And Rutgers riding some serious momentum, Jerry, taking on Indiana. Biggest keys here.
Rutgers has to hold off on the Indiana fast start, and Greg Schiano's already told his team this. So I know exactly how that meeting has gone. So, you know, they're going to hit us hard, strong. They've proven they can move the ball against good teams early. We got to survive that, and then we got to play Schiano ball, and we got to possess the ball. We got to stop the run. We got to do what Wimsatt can do, and we have to throw the ball deep at times. I think it's a pretty simple deal. Take it easy in the beginning and then play Schiano ball and move on.
Do you think he refers to it as Schiano ball
If he
in
just
the
says
meetings?
my ball.
Yeah.
Play my
I mean,
ball.
it would seem it would like be a little.
Well,
over
there's
the
a
top,
couple
wouldn't it?
balls in the conference. There's
Yeah.
Bielema ball and
Right.
the Schiano ball.
Right,
Very-
but
very-
do you say we're going to play good defense, we're going to run the ball, we're not going to make mistakes, we're going to have good special teams,
No.
which is Schiano ball, or do you actually?
No,
I
here's
think
how
it's-
that goes.
It's implied.
No,
It's
so he says that, and,
Yeah.
and Nicole and I are teammates, and he goes, Schiano ball.
Schiano ball.
That's kind of how it works.
All right. Okay.
I echo all of that. And then I'll also just say I think finishing drives early is going to be key for them. Obviously, only 6 points prior to that fourth quarter explosion. The game wouldn't have needed those theatrics as much if they had been able to get into the end zone and not just settle for some field goals. So I think that's going to be key to just kind of take over the game, control the game, and then you just rely on the defense, you run the ball.
You know, I was in a situation once as an assistant coach where we had one more game to win to go to a bowl game and hadn't gone to a bowl game forever. And our head coach said, I want everyone to bring in all their bowl paraphernalia, your bowl rings that you've had, your gifts and all that. And after the team meeting, we set them up on a table. And as the players walked out, they saw all the bowl gifts.
That's cool.
and they were fired up. This will be a fired-up Rutgers team.
Yeah, super cool. Will be a great story for them, not only to make it to a bowl, but to wrap it up this early. And particularly when you look at their schedule here going forward, it'd probably be a good idea to wrap it up right now because it is very challenging. Finally, the game in Lincoln, Huskers and Wildcats. Unclear on Ben Bryant's status. I wouldn't say it sounded great when David Braun talked about him. Both these teams coming off byes, both coming off wins. What do you think decides this one?
Yeah, well, I think, the key for both of these teams, but especially Nebraska, over the course of the season has been not turning the ball over. And there was a stretch there where they felt like they really had that under control, but that is going to be the key. You can't give Northwestern opportunities to come and stay in this game. But I think Nebraska is improved. I think they're well positioned here to get to a bowl game in Matt Rule's first season. So this is the type of game that you take care of business and you just try to play as clean as possible, and you should come out on the winning side.
And both these teams can count to 6, and both of them can be bowl eligible. I think Nebraska has a little bit of an edge. You mentioned the week off. This fascinates me because they both have the week off, both coming off a win, but Nebraska has the edge on what can happen in an off week for this reason. They're unique on offense. I mean, their 60% run, they run all kinds of options. How does the Northwestern scout team simulate that? On defense, Nebraska is this 3-3-5 defense. That's not what everyone else runs. So Northwestern is in a little bit of disadvantage to simulate these two unique parts of the Nebraska football team. And so they probably had to work a little bit harder with their scout team than Nebraska, because Nebraska's defending pretty typical offense and pretty typical defense what Northwestern runs.
Interesting, too, they're at a disadvantage in that their weaknesses counter Nebraska's strengths, right? I mean, Nebraska runs the ball so well. Northwestern's last in the Big Ten in terms of rushing defense. And then, you look at Northwestern and their run game, it has really struggled this year. It feels like the way for them to approach this would be to throw the ball. But if Ben Bryant's out, you wonder, maybe you go to Ryan Helinski, who threw for more than 300 yards against Nebraska last year, because that would seem like the way to beat the Huskers.
Yeah, and as you point out about the run offense, run defense, that's been where we've been really impressed by Nebraska. So it is an interesting matchup of strengths and weaknesses. But again, a big one as you're trying to count to 6.
And protecting against the 3-3-5. If Northwestern decides to throw it a lot, I mean, there's all kinds of blitzes. You can draw them up in the dirt and send them out.
Yeah, no, I've had issues with pass protection for sure. This was fun, great.